Tonight, how China could switch off our electricity just like that now that we've gone so green. And the ABC stars yet another Aboriginal radical likening the fight here for an Aboriginal voice to a Palestinian terrorist group's war on Israel. What are these clowns doing? Also tonight, the Albanese government has sent a boatload of illegal immigrants to Nauru, the first in 9 years. Is Labor already losing control of our borders? But first, I can't believe what I've been seeing in the newspapers and all this serious talk on the TV. We're being conned, right? I mean, the media, the politicians, we're being conned, all of us. Why is anyone at all taking seriously this statement on the weekend by supposed Aboriginal leaders, people who pushed the voice that Australians just voted against, 61% to 39% because of dividers by race? Why is this statement being taken seriously when the people who wrote it refuse to be named? Why are they so gutless or such frauds that they hide in the dark and snipe, calling no voters, 61% of the country, racist, accusing Australians of committing a shameful act by saying no to these activist power grab and saying that, we're also appalling and mean-spirited, to be utterly unbelievable? Well, I have to say, after listening to a couple of days of this, shame on the journalists who are treating this garbage stunt so seriously and now spreading this poison, acting like useful idiots instead of unmasking these muppets. They should be saying to the authors of this statement, unless you put your name to this, it's not getting a run in my newspaper, unless it's back with the comics. Show us your faces. I mean, I'm wondering, Noel Pearson, are you behind this? Did you help write it? Marsha Langton, is this your work? Thomas Mayo, Megan Davis? Just step up. Or maybe it was the office cleaner. Maybe the work experience kid. Who would know? Who exactly are these anonymous people claiming to speak for Australia's Aborigines and damn us like this? This statement says, we're leaders. Leaders of what? Where? Were any of them elected by anyone but themselves? And the thing is, there's actually a reason they're anonymous, and that's in fact the con. The secrecy is actually what makes this statement seem much, much bigger than it really is. And the secrecy is, of course, deliberate, and shame on the media for going along with it. Let me prove this to you, prove how you're being conned. If you knew, for instance, that Marsha Langton helped write this, and who'd know if she did, then we'd all laugh, wouldn't we? I mean, in my opinion, she's just an over-promoted academic from Melbourne University, elected by nobody, and she's been playing that tatty race card for years, calling everyone from Tim Flannery to John Howard a racist. And then remember how she embarrassed the Yes campaign by calling no voters racist too?
They're the ones who are spewing the racism.
So if this is Marsha Langton at again saying racist, shameful, wah, almost nobody would take this statement seriously. I mean, they'd just say, it's Marsha again. Or does the statement come from the very florid pen of Noel Pearson? Well, that'd be a joke too. I mean, this man made a career of denouncing people when he didn't get his way, like some second-rate Old Testament prophet. Oh, Noel is upset again. Well, big deal. Tell me the day is not. I mean, remember how he abused no campaign leader Jacinta Nampijinpa Price in the campaign?
And their strategy was to find a black fella to punch down on other black fellas.
So if Pearson wrote this, I really couldn't give a toss. And same if it was, say, Thomas Mayo, the former Marxist unionist. Again, we don't know if it was him. But if so, we know exactly why he's outraged. He thought the voice would be more free money.
This is the first step. It's a vital step, and it puts all the explanation behind it. Pay the rent, for example. How do we do that in a way that is transparent and that it actually sees reparations?
So Thomas Mayo's upset? Well, show me someone who cares. No Aboriginal town or tribe elected this bloke either. So just who is behind this statement? Who that we'd actually think, that's an opinion I should take seriously, that person. Well, in fact, what makes this an even bigger farce is that some members of the Prime Minister's Aboriginal-only Advisory Committee, advising him on the voice, have told journalists, again privately, they don't like the document's language. They don't want to be part of it. It doesn't speak for them. Which makes his statement an even bigger joke when even some of the radical activists behind The Voice thinks it goes too far. So all the more reason then to know exactly whose dumb idea this was and then have them held accountable for throwing such a nasty tantrum. Now, the only reason I can think of them staying masked, hiding in the shadows, is that if we knew who they really were, we'd laugh or just yawn. And they know it. Got to go to the ABC's bias today because it's shameful. And, you know, a couple of times a year you see this farce of the managing director, David Anderson, trotting up to Canberra, fronting one of Parliament's Senate committees and pretending the ABC is actually not biased at all. Like today when he's had to field questions about the obvious anti-Israel bias of his Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner and of reporters like Dana Morse, who identifies as Aboriginal and seem to me to be so very pro-voice.
They're protesting about the invasion. They're protesting about the genocide of Aboriginal people that is ongoing today.
The genocide that's going on today? Now, like I said, normally it's a farce, it's just theatre. You know, Anderson makes out that the ABC critics in Parliament, all those silly liberals, have got it all wrong, you know. But, hello, change your script today, really, finally, a sign of real embarrassment. I'm joined by Sophie Ellsworth, media writer for The Australian, who's written all about it in that fine paper. Sophie, Tom Joyner, the ABC's Middle East correspondent, suddenly he's been pulled out of Israel, even though there's now a war on his patch. And you think, all hands to the deck, what's happened?
Well, Andrew, he made these pretty disgraceful comments in a WhatsApp group with over 600 journalists and media types from around the world, basically refuting claims that babies had been beheaded in the conflict in Israel. And he was largely condemned by the media. Now, David Anderson said at Senate estimates today he is being rotated out. So they're not saying he's been pulled out of Israel because of this. But let's just be clear, he's been rotated out of Israel for now, and he won't be returning for the foreseeable future. He will be returning to his base in Istanbul. Andrew, this is very bad for Tom Joyner. He is the ABC's Middle East correspondent who is now under investigation as a result of the Australian breaking this story and his actions in that group. And it's pretty damning when their Middle East correspondent is, for the foreseeable future, not reporting on what is going on in Israel right now.
I find it amazing. It's exactly the time to remove your Middle Eastern correspondent from a country when there's a war just broken out. I mean, that doesn't fly. What did David Anderson say then about journalist Dana Morse, for instance, saying there was an ongoing genocide of Aborigines in Australia, and paying out, of course, Peter Dutton very badly as well?
Well, this is interesting too. Mr. Anderson defended those comments that genocide is ongoing among Indigenous Australians. Senator Holly Hughes put this to him and refuted these claims by Dana Morse. But Mr. Anderson has stood by them. He said he'll look into it. But this is what tends to happen with the ABC, Andrew, at these hearings, as you know. Questions are put to them, they bat them away, they always back in their reporters. But we'll see what happens in the coming months when the questions on notice are returned. But this is not good for Dana Morse making these sort of claims, I would argue. But let's see what happens.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw her making those comments on Insiders. Don't tell me she didn't mean it. The ABC even said, I don't get this. I know I've heard it before, but I would love to know his explanation. The ABC sent no fewer than 37 journalists and staff to the annual Garma Festival in Yungu country, Arnhem Land in Northern Territory. That's where Anthony Albanese makes his big announcements on The Voice. It's now become a place of worship and all that. 37! It was like, you know, you probably struggled to send 37 to the announcement of World War II. 3, how could he justify that?
Well, their financial officer said that there was a lot of good content that came out of there. They produced shows out of there, such as Insiders. and Q&A. But Andrew, 37 of reporters flown up to a remote part of Australia, or should I say editorial staff, at a cost of about $150,000 to the taxpayer. This is an awful lot of money to cover what many would argue is a pro-yes event. So he was questioned about that today, but he said, look, it was spending that we can justify, and they thought it was a good way to spend the taxpayers' money.
37 to that. I bet you they'd struggle to send 2 to the launch of the No campaign. I mean, seriously. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for your time. What a joke it all is. But something more serious. What is going on with the Albanese government? A couple of things, more things are going wrong. Apart from, energy revolution, the voice, blah, blah, blah. Let's start with this one. One of the very first decisions Anthony Albanese made when he became Prime Minister was to let a Sri Lankan family of illegal immigrants stay here, even though they'd lost just about every court case trying to claim they really were refugees when they weren't. It sent a signal. Well, for the first time in 9 years, we've now got a government having to send boat people to Nauru again. Only 11 this time, but it is an unwelcome start. Joining me is the opposition's Home Affairs spokesman, James Patterson. James, thanks for your time. The government kept this secret for a month and now won't tell us anything about these so-called asylum seekers, but only 11 of them. That's not so many. Should we care?
Well, Andrew, we've seen this movie before, haven't we? Labor gets into office. They weaken the strong border protection policies of the Liberal and National parties. The boats start again and human misery results in it. And it's only with the election again of a Liberal and Nationals government that we stop the boats, that we secure the borders, that we close down detention centres, get kids out of detention centres, and even close down some of those regional processing centres. But Labor hasn't learned from their mistakes, and I am deeply worried that we now have the first people transferred to Nauru in 9 years, and the government is not willing to be open and transparent about it at all, because I fear we are headed into those dark times again.
Yes, it's quite. Look, I'm not going to start panicking about 11. They said, the boats were too rickety to turn back, so they brought them in. But I don't know. It all starts with a few and then ends up with who knows how many. James Patterson, another issue. A little bit like that last one that came out of the Senate estimates hearing late yesterday. Solar panels. Now, Australia's got absolutely nuts on them, And the thing is, 99% of them are imported, and they all need smart inverters to convert, the energy into electricity. But of those smart inverters, more than half come from communist China. They're all hooked up into the internet, and they could be switched off by China if it's put a bug in there or hacks or does a hack or something. Liberal Senator Holly Hughes asked the government expert about exactly this yesterday.
Beijing can fundamentally tell these companies to, they can sabotage, they can surveil, or they can disrupt power supplies. So what is being done to ensure that we have sovereignty and our sovereign risk is protected when it comes to our energy markets?
Australia has the largest proportion of rooftop solar anywhere in the developed world, 1 in 3 households in Australia, and it's something that the department has been focusing on, but it does take some time in terms of doing the work to develop and then implement a solution.
James, we've gone from relying on our own coal-fired power stations, using our own coal for electricity, now to using a lot of solar panels, among the other things, that can be switched off by China. It seems to me an idiotic thing to do.
Andrew, energy security is national security, and at the same time that Europe has learned the danger of being dependent on an authoritarian neighbour for their energy source, and they're seeking to reduce it, Australia's going in the opposite direction. We're moving from sovereign-controlled sources of energy to sources of energy where we're dependent on an authoritarian neighbour. It was several months ago that I first revealed that 58% of the smart solar inverters being installed in Australia were made by companies controlled or linked to the Chinese Communist Party, including Huawei. That was on the front page of the Australian newspaper through Cameron Stewart. And then several weeks later, the respected independent Cybersecurity Cooperative Research Centre released a report backing my concerns. It's only now that the government has publicly acknowledged this risk admitted this risk and said it's a problem. But in the meantime, they've done absolutely nothing at all about it. Every day right now, there are thousands of these inverters being installed on the roofs of family homes, small businesses, schools, community organisations, and every one of those represents a cybersecurity risk to this country, which, if activated, if taken advantage of by a strategic adversary like the Chinese Communist Party, could shut down our grid. Now, we cannot afford to be this vulnerable in such an uncertain strategic environment, but the Albanese government has no plan whatsoever to deal with it.
James, one last thing. I was in Darwin on the weekend for a funeral, which is why I couldn't do the show last night. Apologies to viewers. From my hotel in the city, I could look across the water to the port of Darwin, which dominates the estuary out there. And behind it is the Darwin Industry Zone. And then there's a rail link and go straight to Palmerston, which is a big satellite city. There's a gas hub as well. And I couldn't believe we had leased this clearly strategic site to China, right? The Port of Darwin to China. And the Albanese government last Friday, when, everyone closes up shop, that's the time to dump bad news, announced, just before the Prime Minister flies to China as well, oh, well, actually, we changed our mind. There's no security issues with this. It's all fine. And what really underlined it for me, and thanks to my cousin's husband for pointing me out on this one, what I didn't know, and what makes the decision even more bonkers, is that the US military actually has a fuel depot behind the wharf for use in times of war. How can this not be sensitive?
Andrew, you can't understand it, I can't understand it, and when he was in opposition, Anthony Albanese couldn't understand it either. In fact, he described it as a grave mistake, and he promised if Labor was elected that they would deal with it and he would commission a review. Well, finally, they did commission a review. They have not released it. We do not know what it says. And as you say, on a Friday afternoon, after doing his press conference for the day, after the Parliament has risen and just before he flies to the United States, he dropped the decision that the government will not be doing anything about this at all. Now, I really hope, Andrew, that this is not a quid pro quo ahead of his visit to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. I really hope it is not an exchange for the lifting of sanctions on Australian products, because as we know, those were unlawfully applied in the first place. There was no legitimate basis for it, and it was always incumbent of the Chinese government to remove those for that reason. They would have failed if the challenges in the World Trade Organization were allowed to proceed. So I really hope that this is not a policy concession to China from the Albanese government, because they promised they would not back down when it comes to Australian sovereignty.
Hoping and praying and hoping and praying. I tell you what, Kimberley Kitching, the late Kimberley Kitching, Labor Senator, lovely woman, friend of mine, said to her, the last conversation I had, Labor's going to go soft on China. She said, of course. And I think this might be part of it. Thank you so much for your time, James Patterson. After the break, we voted against The Voice, but we're still getting a form of apartheid. More and more places that you are banned from going to if you're not of the right race. Plus, a Muslim scholar from the Middle East on why Israel is right. Hamas must be destroyed. All right, we voted against The Voice, Labor's plan to divide us by race in our own constitution. But by hook or by crook, our political class is determined to divide us. And one way is by stopping Australians of the wrong race from climbing some of our most spectacular rock formations or mountains, or from camping in our most beautiful spots. Now, we've already had Aboriginal groups decide to ban climbing on Uluru, for instance, which has hurt tourism numbers there. The ban climbing on Mount Warning, New South Wales, because of so-called secret men's business. Ban visiting and swimming in the lovely Gunlum Falls in Kakadu, and banned camping in Bear Gully, a campsite overlooking Victoria's lovely Wilson's Prom, and being used for decades, really. That ban, no clear reason given, Aboriginal heritage or something, but now you got parks officials hunting down, or the treaty officials hunting down rock climbers spotted in Victoria's Grampians, magnificent climbing country, threatening one with fines of nearly $350,000 if it turned out to climb there. And that's because there are claims there are Aboriginal sites there, even though really most are invisible. And what are they doing to actually identify and mark them off? Nothing that I can see Joining me is geologist Mark Hendricks, who's campaigned to keep the right to climb alive in our country and has written a guide to climbing Mount Warning. Mark Hendricks, great to see you again. An increasing number of bans. We're told it's to respect Aboriginal culture, all in favour of respecting culture, but I'm not so sure that's the entire story. What's your problem with this gig?
Oh, look, Andrew, these climbing bans, which, as you said, started with Ayers Rock and are expanding now to include places like Mount Warning. The rock climbing bans in the Grampians now constitute 80% of the previous areas you could climb in the Grampians are now closed to rock climbers. So this is spreading. To me, it's all about politics. It doesn't have anything to do with culture. When you look at the cultural claims at Mount Warning, for instance, arguably the true custodians of Mount Warning have been ignored by National Parks and Wildlife Service for the last 20 years. They're currently fighting for a seat at the table to have a say in what's going on in their own park. So it's not really got nothing to do with culture. This is all about politics. This is about Aboriginal activists exerting their authority and power over the rest of us. It was great that we saw the voice get knocked down, but I think as a result of that, we're going to see increased action by Aboriginal activists in terms of trying to shut down and exert that power over the rest of us.
It seems to me a power flex. And like I said, the Grampians climbing now has been banned for a few years. Where is the marking off of those Aboriginal heritage sites that supposedly are so valuable the climbers can't go there? You know, where's the signs? Where's the displays? Where? I mean, I've mentioned a number of bands already. Are there many more coming?
Look, the Glasshouse Mountains in southern Queensland are probably the next place where we might see some bans. So there's Mount Beerwah and Mount Tibrogargan. There's been a concerted effort by a group called Save Our Summits, and you can join their Facebook page to fight that ban and to just get in touch with the Queensland National Parks Service and just to sort of highlight the importance of those places for other groups and community groups, the importance of those places as areas where people can experience the joy and exhilaration of climbing those summits and looking over that incredible vista from those summits. So yeah, look, Mount Beerwah and Mount Tibrogargan are probably next on the cutting board. St Mary's Peak in the Flinders Ranges is another one that's long had signs indicating that the local traditional owners would rather you stop at a lower saddle with a lesser view. So yeah, there's more coming. And that's not just that's the parks and the climbing areas. There's other places. There's beaches. There's parks. There's an event in Victoria, rallying event around one of the lakes there in Western Victoria, which has been banned for a couple of years now. So these are extending outside of parks and climbing areas, bushwalking areas, into other areas. Picnicking and camping, for instance, are also at risk. Where if you're not of a particular group, you won't be allowed access in these places.
It's so extraordinary. So much for the kind invitation and a small ask and all that kind of stuff. Please, respect on both sides. Mark Hendricks, thank you so much indeed for your time and keep up the fight. Did you see the ABC last night? It was terrifying. No, I'm laughing, but no, it was terrifying. On Q&A, it had the head of the activist Get Up group, who identifies as Aboriginal. She appeared with both Aboriginal activist type earrings, so you knew where she stood, big identity, plus a pro-Palestinian scarf. And that was to show she was on Gaza's side in its genocidal war against Israel. And be clear about that. When she was actually told that the Hamas slogan, from the river to the sea, which you've been hearing on protests here being chanted, from the river to the sea actually meant wiping out what's in between the River Jordan and the sea, which is Israel, wipe it out. She said, fine.
That slogan, from the river to the sea, Larissa, do you understand why some Jewish people find that really offensive?
Yeah, I understand that, but I also don't believe that it is hate speech, and I think that in the way that I don't agree with that. I believe that Palestinians have a right to call for freedom.
And I'll talk later in the show about what sort of horrors have emerged overnight that explain very clearly what Hamas does in this so-called fight for freedom that she's so seemingly red hot on. And there's the Get Up leader, right, linking what she thinks is the Aboriginal cause here, like The Voice, to a war, a slaughter really in the Middle East, including the slaughter of the Jews?
For First Nations people, there's an incredible solidarity that exists here, and we are talking about securing a free future for Palestine. We're going to talk about the freedom to continue your language, your culture, and not just to survive, but to thrive as people. And so for First Nations people, we, the day after a devastating referendum loss, are out there campaigning and protesting and calling for peace.
I mean, what are these race hustlers here wishing for this country? That we get pushed to some sort of war of our own, like the Hamas war in Israel? This is playing not with matches, but with dynamite, because so many now are flirting with this insane idea. You got voice architect Marsha Langton, for instance, warned during the campaign of an intifada. That was her word, an intifada. And rugby league star Josh Adokar tweeted a pro-Gaza slogan linking the Aboriginal cause. One struggle, one fight, same deal. No one's seeing people doing this, and I could give you other examples too, can be silent. We cannot let this insanely dangerous idea catch hold. Because what we're seeing in Gaza is not so much a freedom fight, but a death cult led by a terrorist group that actually says in its charter, no Israel, and Islam a state instead. Joining me is Hussein Abdel Hussein, who grew up in the Middle East and is now a research fellow with the US-based Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Hussein Abdul Hussein, thank you so much for joining us. Look, we've got a really strange situation for me. We're seeing around the world these huge protests by Palestinians in London and Stockholm and in Washington or New York, and it's quite frightening, some of it. There's a chant that's common to almost all of them, including the ones here in Sydney and Melbourne: free, free Palestine. What do you understand by that phrase?
Well, from the top of my head, I understand the destruction of Israel, because I assume that what they mean by Palestine is that they mean the land between the river and the sea, and that's the whole land. I think all of the protests you mentioned, I have yet to see one of them uttering the word peace, or at least raising a peace sign. If you say peace, it means two states, one that's Israel, a Jewish Israel, and one that's Arab Palestine. This I don't see. What I see is free Palestine alone, and stop the Israeli engagement with Hamas, military engagement. And to me, that signifies we want Israel gone.
Yeah, but the thing is, people say, well, look, it turns into a war against the people of Gaza. That's terrible. Hamas does not represent them, even though Hamas is the government there. But then I don't see it. Where are the alternative voices in Gaza? Where are the human rights people? Where are the democracy people? Where's some alternative that you could talk to if Hamas doesn't represent Gaza? I don't see them.
Well, I don't see them either, and it's hard to gauge public opinion in territories or countries or strips like the Gaza Strip, where the tyranny is really dominant. I don't blame people who can't really express themselves. I lived most of my life in the Arab world. I know how things are. I know the social shaming and the physical harassment. So I understand that there are no voices. What I do not understand is that this kind of war, it's assumed that as if the Israelis enjoy doing this. Now, mind you, if Israel goes into a ground operation, the Israelis expect to be losing some soldiers, or at least many of their soldiers. No one wants to do that. I'm sure Israel doesn't want to lose people fighting this war, but someone will have to do it to stop the massacre of October 7 from being repeated. Now, a few days ago, one of the chiefs of Hamas, Khalid Mish'al, who lives in Doha, went on one of the major Arabic networks, and he said, this is war, and civilians die in war. So he was implying that Hamas is in for a war where where Hamas expects to lose many thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians. And that's the Hamas policy. And that's unfortunately something that has been imposed on Israel. And the only way for Israel to deal with this is what we see now. And that's unfortunate. The loss of life on both sides is very unfortunate. And the world should regret this. But what the world should not do is to tie Israel's hands, impose a ceasefire, and instead of finishing off Hamas now, we'll be only delaying the problem. And 1 year, 2 years from now, we will have another round of massacre and war. This is the sixth round of war between Israel and Hamas. And unless Israel gets rid of Hamas, we will expect war number 8, number 9, number 10, and more casualties and more death. So someone should solve this once and for all.
Hussein Abdul Hussein, you were raised in the Middle East. You've seen the sort of fomenting of hatred in parts of it. In Gaza, for instance, I've seen video of children being taught to hate and to kill Jews even at school. You see imams there and sheikhs preaching that Jews must be killed. And you've got Hamas sitting on top of it all in a sort of police state, an Islamist police state. What's it like for the people there?
I grew up in Iraq and Lebanon. It's similar to Gaza because in Lebanon you have Hezbollah, which is a militia that undermines the sovereignty of the state and rules with an iron fist, and it's allied with Iran, which is an Islamist regime. And like Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah is also Islamist. Now, I don't blame Islam, the religion. What I blame is bringing Islam into politics and into public space. Islam as a religion is a spiritual exercise. I was born Muslim. I know many Muslims who practice this religion without becoming radicalized or violent. Our problem is with political Islam, not with Islam. And this is what Hamas is practicing, and this is what Hezbollah is practicing. And in the name of God, they are instigating these generations after generations. They're calling on these generations to die. They've turned themselves into death cults. And look at all these protests, even the ones in the West. You don't hear these protesters asking for better economy, for better lives, for better jobs for Gazans. What they're shouting for is a fight over land, a fight over a mosque, a fight over our holy, sanctimonious mosque or of Al-Aqsa. So there's really no policy or plan that these guys are seeking that improves the lives of Palestinians. All what you see is just emotional appeal to instinct and to religious slogans. I think political Islamism, is a disease that should be eradicated. Now, the United States did a great job by eradicating some part of this Islamist radical organization, the ISIS, the one that was in Iraq and Syria. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't get rid of the rest of these Islamist organizations. And at this point, Hamas, of course, is the one we're talking about. And I'm happy to see that the West is supporting Israel in its quest to decimate Hamas and dismantle the organization once and for all.
Hussein Abdul Hussein, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that. Fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stuff. After the break, big surprise. I'm going to defend the ABC for interviewing a terrorist. The panel after this. To my own surprise as well, I am going to defend the ABC because we should always defend a principle, not a side. The ABC boss was today attacked by Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson, who said, disgracefully, the ABC says, when he was being grilled by her Senate's committee, says it won't remove its interview with Hamas from its online platforms. An interview in which this Hamas official states Hamas had no plans to target civilians in Israeli attack. In fact, I have to say, interviewer Sarah Ferguson in that interview pushed back hard again and again against the Hamas lies.
The chief commander of Al-Qassam Brigade, who who announced the operation, he was gave clear instructions not to not to target civilians or not to harm civilians.
It was clearly part of the plan of those fighters who crossed the border to murder, terrorise and kidnap.
Joining me is the Tuesday panel, Louise Elliott, business consultant, Hobart City Councillor, and Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from The Spectator on politics and culture. Will Kingston, I don't mind interviewing, even Mr. Hitler on the TV show, provided he is exposed as a, beyond the pale and a clown and a liar and a bastard and whatever. But maybe I'm wrong, should the ABC have interviewed the head of a proscribed terrorist group like Hamas?
No, I don't think you're wrong, Andrew. This was powerful journalism. Full credit to Sarah Ferguson on this. I've got to say, listening to that Send Estimates hearing, if this is the instinct on the right in Australia when it comes to free speech and the looming battles we are going to face around misinformation, I'm incredibly worried. The sad reality is that there are people on the right who are just as anti-free speech as on the left in this country. Now, a couple of things here. Number one, this sort of mentality treats viewers like idiots. It says that we don't trust you to make informed decisions yourselves. To your point, obviously we need to put these sorts of conversations in context. Sarah did that. But the other thing is, this is so arbitrary, Andrew. Like, would we be having this conversation if the ABC spoke to Gerry Adams? I don't think so. And this is going to be the problem with this misinformation agenda, is it's going to pick and choose what things we should listen to and what things we shouldn't. I'm really concerned if this is what the Liberal Party thinks passes for defending free speech. Really, really worried.
Yeah, I really do think, as I say, principle above aside, but still. Louise, maybe we're wrong. Is it 3 out of 3 between the three of us, or do you have a different view on this one?
Short answer, it is 3 out of 3, definitely. And what we do need is our public broadcaster to be showing the full argument, all of the different sides. Of course, there's a line. We don't allow, or no one wants to see, indoctrination or terrorism on our screens. But I think when the context is given and when the interview in this case is appropriately pushed, the interviewee pushed hard enough and asked the questions that the public wants asked, this is what we need to happen. And completely, if we start falling into the situation where the information that comes to us from our public broadcaster is curated, then we have a big problem, because not only is it on sensitive topics like this, but it will apply to other things which are in the public interest, whether that's, gender issues or other uncomfortable issues that people don't want discussed. We're going to start seeing only one side come through.
Well said. Will, I'm stunned that Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, I mean, this is not quite a free speech issue because someone's paying for it, and that someone is the mug taxpayer. She's released a 3-minute video, clearly to win over voters ahead of the election in a year's time. Maybe she's getting nervous about whether it should last that long if she doesn't get her vote up. She's actually made taxpayers pay for this thing, and you'll be amazed why she did that when you see some of this ad. Here it is.
I grew up in Durack. My grandfather came to Queensland as a migrant. He was a boilermaker. He said to me it was tough work, but it was a job that put food on the table and a roof over his head. He did the very best he could for his family. And I want the best for every single family in this state. It's why I got into politics, because I believe that no matter who you are or where you come from, you deserve the best opportunities in life.
Now, this has been widely reported as being charged to taxpayers. Should it be, Will?
No, of course it shouldn't be, Andrew. This is absolutely outrageous. I'd perhaps be a bit more forgiving if it wasn't just such a bad ad. Every single title political trope is there. You've got the hard hats. You've got, I think the future is brighter than it's ever been and all that sort of nonsense. The thing which probably we need to bring up above and beyond the ethical issue here is that the quality of political advertising in Australia is so woefully bad. And that's actually bad because it's a problem for political engagement in this country. And the only exception is Pauline Hanson, who's actually doing some really interesting stuff on social media with her cartoon vignettes, which are funny and satirical. And the major parties could learn a lot from her. I think at least if you're going to do this sort of propaganda, at least make it entertaining, because this sort of stuff is boring and it's morally dubious.
Well, I better switch quickly to the only politician on this panel. Louise Elliott, I hope your advertising is much nicer and charming and innovative and fascinating and not taxpayer funded.
Yes, and no to those questions. Well, what gets me with this is that it's so blatant. It's like there's no attempt at all to even pass this off as in some sort of, public interest message. It's complete and utter taxpayer-funded political campaigning. And if I was in Queensland, I would be wild about this, and I absolutely would be encouraging, the opposition and whoever else to be digging down to every cent that the taxpayer money has paid for it, because it's completely unacceptable. But there's a definite, there's an arrogance to it that they haven't even tried to sugarcoat it. There's been nothing around the edges to even make it look like government material. So it's a pretty poor act, and I think there definitely needs to be accountability for it.
Hey, Will, it's now, a little bit of time, a week and a bit since the Voice got voted down. I'm hearing, I think the No campaign, well, obviously the No campaign won up to the point that the Voice got voted down. They won. Since then, I'm wondering whether the Yes campaign has won by having this massive all-out assault that it's been racist, and the media's piling in, sections of the media, it's a vote of racist, etc., etc. The writing of the history of that is now being won by the left, I'm thinking. How do you see it?
Early days, I think, to talk about history, Andrew, and how it will be seen. But what I think it shows is the lessons obviously haven't been learnt, and they haven't been learnt by the left in the media, leftist activists and the leftist political class. The lesson of this campaign was you don't speak down to people, you don't call them idiots, you don't abuse them if they have different political views to you. You engage, you persuade. Now, the sad reality is if they aren't going to learn those lessons, then I think that's bad for political discourse in this country. But more than that, it's incredibly bad for Indigenous affairs, because the only way we're going to drive towards practical outcomes here is if we do start to actually get more practical with how we talk about these issues, and if we do start to actually reach across to sceptical people and persuade them as opposed to trying to just abuse people.
Yeah, well, sorry, Louise, I'm out of time, but I want to come back from you on this one, because I don't think that lesson of not talking down to people has been learned, given the talking down to people that's happened for the last week and a half.
Yes, well, what I'm feeling, or what I've sensed, is it really a sense of relief from people who were strongly no. But no, the lessons haven't been heard. So I think people are kind of just bracing at the moment to see what's going to come next.
Yeah, Louise Elliott, Will Kingston, great to catch up with you both. Thanks for your time. See you next week. Well, after the break, very interesting move today from Peter Dutton. I like it. The Liberals have made a very important choice, you see, to fight in the same way and in the same places that they fought against The Voice. Plus, Israel last night did what it shouldn't have to do in a world that hadn't gone absolutely mad, showed journalists a film that had some crying. I read in yesterday's column that the Liberals should actually campaign against the Albanese government's global warming agenda in the same way, in the same places it campaigned so well against The Voice. And today, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton was doing just that. He went to the coast near the Hunter Valley, where the Albanese government wants a massive wind farm out at sea, visible from land. And what's interesting is that the two seats there, Hunter and Robertson, are both Labor held, but both voted against Labor's Voice. And with global warming here again, they're being made to pay for an agenda cooked up by the elite. And Dutton went for it.
I do think this is an absolute travesty. And I do think when you go out into the waters and see the natural beauty, the bird life, all of that which is at risk, the marlin fishing, obviously, which is a big part of the environment here. When you look at, the whales and the mother and the calf that we saw out there, the dolphins, all of that is at risk because there's no environmental consideration of what these huge wind turbines, 260, 280 metres out of the water, will mean for that wildlife and for the environment. And the fact that the government hasn't taken that into consideration, they're completely and utterly driven by their desire to get to 82%.
Joining me is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australia and host of Outsiders here on Sky on Sundays at 9 a.m. Rowan, this campaign now on global warming aimed at Labor seats, not the old Liberal ones in the city now held by Teals. Nice switch. What do you think?
Oh, it's fantastic, Andrew. Absolutely superb. Congratulations to Peter Dutton. I've been saying with you on the show and elsewhere for months now that if Peter Dutton followed the template of the No campaign on The Voice, sure, he took a little bit of time to get there, but when he got there, he was committed to saying no to The Voice. This was the first time for a long time that the Liberals had fought in the culture wars. If you remember, Scott Morrison used to say, oh, I don't know, woke, too woke, what's the difference? I don't care about that, and there's no jobs in the culture wars, all this sort of stuff. It was all rubbish at the time, and Morrison deservedly got punted because he refused to engage. The secret to the Liberals winning the next election, I've been saying, by the way, for several months, they will win the next election. We will have a Dutton government, and I personally can't wait for it to arrive. Albo is now albatross, as the front cover of The Spectator says this week. Albo now hangs around Labor's re-election chances like a dead albatross. He's an omen of bad luck and ill fortune as the Labor ship heads towards the rocks of the next election, and that motley crew of ministers that we've all become used to will be floating on the rafts out to sea, metaphorically speaking. Peter Dutton, or if we had a referendum, Andrew, on every one of the major culture wars, global warming, net zero, transgenderism in schools, we've had the race one, we would get the same result. We would get 62-38 each time. The simple fact is that all the coalition has to do now is stick to their guns, fight the culture wars electorate by electorate. It's really sensible to go to the Labor seats where culture wars play. I mean, there's so many culture war issues that are at play that the Liberals have been too scared to touch. They're there to be won. You win the culture wars by fighting them, and they certainly can.
Well, it's so true, and it just goes to a thing that I've always argued, that we should try to, as Conservatives, Libertarians, should try to drag more issues into a forum where there's a vote at the end of it. Try to make it a votable issue, because they'd win most times. Now, to the war in Israel, warning to viewers, I'm not going to show you anything disturbing. I'm sick of that. It's distressing, but we are going to talk about it. Rowan, Israel's government military have been so shocked that so many people on the left particularly, and so many journalists, have either doubted some of the horrors that Hamas terrorists have committed on the day they killed 1,400 Israelis, or they now think, well, both sides are doing the same, it's no real difference. So Israel's arranged a briefing overnight for journalists, 3/4 of an hour, showing body cam footage, much of it shot by the Hamas terrorists themselves, a young girl hiding under a table, shot dead, boys watching their own father being killed in front of them, themselves shot, baby, well, I'm not going to go on to what I've actually seen with my own eyes about babies there. Why was this briefing necessary?
Oh, absolutely necessary, Andrew. The most disgusting thing that has occurred in my lifetime is what happened on October 7th in the deserts around Gaza. That is the most shocking, disgusting, disgraceful, vile evil that has been perpetrated in my lifetime. One of the morgue workers there who had studied what had happened to the bodies and the victims, the Jewish victims during the Holocaust, one of the morgue workers there described what these Hamas terrorists, these vile creatures, had done to the bodies, the women and children of Jewish women and family members as worse than the Holocaust. You mentioned, decapitation, dismembering of bodies, torturing bodies in front of their children, parents in front of their children, vice versa. Utter degradation, inhumane, beyond belief. Now, we promised after the Holocaust, the world promised never, never again. One of the most important reasons we have places like the Sydney Holocaust Museum and various museums around the world, and the reason many anti-Semites hate these places so much is they are such a powerful reminder of the horrors of the Holocaust. We need to be reminded, and our children need to be reminded, of the horrors of what happened on October 7th, and until every single individual who perpetrated those inhuman horrors is brought to justice or killed, we cannot stop showing what they did.
history has to record this is different. Rowan Dean, thank you so much for your time. That's it from me. Chris Kenny up next. Good night.